Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. This is your boy, the Diggity Doc, Mr. Peptide Panther, Mr. South Auckland Poet, is what we'll call myself today. And I am here to present another episode of the Niggly Niche Cast with the comrade, the Wobbly Wildcard, where we just chat our way through a bunch of Kiwi sporting matters because it's another day of Aotearoa being the greatest sporting nation in the world, and considering I have just published the Sounds of Aotearoa for the last month, Aotearoa is also the best musical nation in the world as well, so we'll shout it out for that. That's what we're here to do, and we do it every week. The Niche Cage is on Patreon, so if you do like what we're doing, jump on Patreon and support us over there. Otherwise, just your eardrums, whakaronga mai is good enough to me. And we also deliver, along with plenty of written content on the website, we also deliver a email newsletter every Monday and Friday filled with a bunch of weird shit. For example, yesterday's email, the Monday email, I found a Touch New Zealand development tour from 2014 that had a bunch of Super Rugby and NRL players in it. So I just dropped it like it was hot on the email. And Wobbly Wildcard, I won't ask you how you're going. I'll ask you what you dropped in the email yesterday.
In the email yesterday, I wrote a fair few words on the current All Whites situation with these games that they've got lined up as later in the year, thinking specifically about how they're going to pick a squad when the chances are it's going to be overwhelmingly dominated, if not entirely dominated, by players based in Europe currently, and how, like, at any other time in the history of the universe, that would not have been a thing that was feasible for a New Zealand football team to be able to do, but suddenly, like, big old influx of transfers in recent times, just over the last few weeks, to go with the influx over the last few years, and it's actually something they could do and not embarrass themselves, having a squad picked almost entirely of, like, European-based players. So I did that. I went and looked at, like, what a potential squad might look at. It was a little bit of a speculative thing, but that, and then also I did a little mini review of the new Bill and Ted movie, which I rather partial to the two originals, and so I watched the third one over the weekend and quite enjoyed it, actually, so I wrote about that as well. So that's what I did in the email.
Lovely jubbly. Those are a couple of the goodies that you can expect in the emails and on our wider agenda on the menu today. We'll go hard and fast through a couple of Kiwi sporting matters. We got Lydia Ko had a good ANA Inspiration tournament. The Caribbean Premier League is all finished. The Trinbago Knight Riders won that, and as they should have, because they had well and truly the best team. We've got and a couple of lads in England playing in the T20 Blast over in England, so quick update on all that shit. Quick update on City Kickboxing leaving Aotearoa for their events in the UAE in a couple of weeks, with headlined by Israel Adesanya, so I've got a couple of bits and bobs around that. The wildcard will take us through the All Whites fixture list that he just referred to, and then we'll do our pretty standard deep dives at this stage of the year with the NRL, Rugby League matters, and football. We got Stephen Taylor's leaving the Wellington Phoenix, and more in-depth thoughts from the wildcard with regards to all our flying Kiwis around this weird old globe. We'll start wildcard with a bit of music, if you don't mind it, because there's plenty of good Kiwi music doing the rounds at the moment. Mid-month, I always look back on the past month, so going back to like mid-August, and just update with a wide selection of Kiwi tunes from the Phoenix Foundation. Got a new one from them. Couple of Kate Owen, Emily Idrosa, Troy Kingi, Masbu Q is a Nigerian-born Kiwi rapper, Polly Hill, LA Woman, Moana and the Tribe, Looking for Alaska, Diva Mahal, Diggy Dupe's got a new track, Church and AP released a couple of tracks a few weeks ago, Dallas Tamaida also released a track a few weeks ago. The one that's perhaps had the most impact, Wildcard, is a young lad, young South Aucklander. That's why I'm all over this one. Got a rep for South Auckland here. Josh, spelt JAWSH685. He is a producer who released a song. I'm not fully down with TikTok, but apparently he's big on TikTok, and he did a collaborative effort with Jason Derulo, and I checked his catalog, his back catalog, and he's got a song with Tiger as well. So he's like a 16, 17-year-old dude from Manurewa in South Auckland making, I would call it South Auckland music. In the titles, he refers to it as siren beats, and it's just classic, good vibe. Music that sounds a lot like Polynesian music in 2020. It's evolved. Obviously, the sounds have evolved, but very upbeaty, very island vibey, and quite catchy. So shout out to him. He's probably, there's some of these artists, like Diggy Dupe released an amazing album. Troy Kingy's amazing himself. You got the Phoenix Foundation there worldwide. A lot of international powerhouses here doing great things from Aotearoa music, but you've got that young wave coming through also doing good things around the world as well. So shout out to him. And how about this for a little transition here, Wildcard? So going from Josh685, Siren Beats, I'm going to ask you, Wildcard, do you know Tom Mish?
I don't believe so.
Oh, well, he's not from New Zealand, for starters, but he is someone I have been listening to a bit. His bio is a 24-year-old composer, songwriter, guitarist, singer, violinist. So he's a bit of a jack of all trades. He released a project with a guy called Yusuf Days recently. Also had Freddie Gibbs on a track that I was listening to this morning as well, The Night Rider featuring Freddie Gibbs. So I think Tom Mish will be right up your alley, Wildcard. Bit of guitaring, bit of singing, multi-instrumentalist. He's very mellow tunes as well. And I was a bit surprised that you didn't know of him. So there you go, Wildcard. A bit of a recommendation for you. Tom Mish, spelt M-I-S-C-H.
Yeah, that's a new one for me. I haven't heard of him. I will have a look and check that out for sure. I was driving to football on Saturday listening to the new Troy Kingy album. And it was a sunny old day, and it was like sunny old music, and it was like if you were sitting in an ad agency trying to come up with an ad to sell a product, you want to make it like summery, you want to make it like the definition of good vibes. I think that experience of like just driving down the semi-country-ish streets into town, with like the window down, Troy Kingy blasting on the speakers, real sunny on the way to football. I think that would be pretty close to the factory defined idea of what like good vibes would mean. Bloody lovely. Have you listened to that one yet? His new one came out Friday, I think. Certainly. I'm probably still leaning towards the closer, All Your Ships Have Sailed, which was the first single that was released, so I've heard it the most. Everything else, when you listen to a new album and it's like the songs don't stand out as songs yet, like they haven't sort of taken an identity independent of like the 40-minute listening experience of just hearing an album. That's kind of where I'm at. Like I've listened to it, I think twice through, but I haven't like got to the point where the songs distinguish themselves from each other. So I'm probably being a little unfair on not picking it, like I'm just picking the song I've heard the most. But that's where I'm at. It takes a while sometimes for these kind of, especially an album that has like a concept and a kind of like coherent idea the whole way through. There's like the songs don't necessarily sound like, sometimes you just get that kind of mixtape vibe from an album where like each song feels like it was specifically created separately to everything else, and then it's just like, here's all the stuff on an album, take it, like do what you want with it, which is also a perfectly reasonable way to release your music. But there's like, sometimes you get these concept albums and you get that like through line which makes everything seem almost so cohesive that it doesn't stand out at first. That's about where I'm at with it still. It takes a few listens to get past that.
So speaking of albums, the Diggy Dupe album is very much in that, cut from that same cloth. I'll just pull up that's called That's Me, That's Team. And it's, so I've listened to a fair bit of Diggy Dupe and talked a fair bit about it, going back to like, Kid of the Inner City, which is it took me from South Auckland to the Greyland, Ponsonby area where Diggy Dupe is from, the inner city kind of area. It's, I'm South Auckland hard, so it's a different vibe. Still, same Auckland, but a different vibe, and it took me there, and that's the beautiful thing. And that album, or EP, whatever it was, it all kind of came together under that storytelling umbrella. And his latest release, That's Me, That's Team, does the same thing. Maybe I just haven't tapped into the wider themes or the greater ideas, but it's a more celebratory record, which is exactly what you would expect or what you would want from an artist who has enjoyed a lot of a growth period and relative success. So there's a different perspective perhaps on the music that he's making. It's still very heavy on the storytelling, very heavy on there's a beautiful thing about Kiwi music and Kiwi hip hop where the craft of like writing a rhyme or writing a bar or writing a verse, you got to have the wordplay, you got to have the flow and those technical elements. But the beautiful thing is, especially like going back to a Homebrew and their Last Week EP and those kind of really top tier Kiwi music projects, it's all the Kiwi references that are packaged in with the technical skill of these artists. And that's what I got from Diggy Dupe. Like he had a line here that he's pushing Porsches like Brendan Hartley. And that's nice. You can only be a Kiwi and know that. And even then, a lot of Kiwis wouldn't even know who Brendan Hartley is. So and it's just all those Kiwi references laid in. But the joy, the beauty of it is that those Kiwi references are delivered along with the top tier skill, craft, and flow and beat selection. So it's really unique, and that's what I love about high quality Kiwi music. But you speaking about albums and then thinking about the Diggy Dupe record, like it's very much more of a celebratory vibe. That's me, that team, that's team. You can feel what that album is going to be like. Like, we arrived, we're here, and I'm still like down for my people and all that stuff. And that's throughout the album, as you're referring to with Troy Kingy. Like, it's all cohesive, it all fits together. There are themes throughout the music, like musical themes. It's there's still high quality albums. You just got to know where to look from it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, when people try to make that argument that, like, there is no good music left anymore, first of all, it's obviously wrong, because, like, how can you have such a definitive, like, concrete idea about something that's always changing? There's always new music being released, and it's like, I don't know, it's already just a closed-minded idea when people have that, so it's often not a good idea to start arguing with people who have their minds closed from the beginning. But, I mean, like, as far as I'm concerned, and like I'm someone who listens to heaps of music from like going back the history of recorded music, probably. I mean, there's like there are albums on my phone which are like way back when, like Mississippi Delta blues type stuff, like going way back. So I would like to think that I have a relatively decent, even if I don't have a decent enough, like, understanding of these things on an intellectual level, I at least still have like the passion to listen to a lot of older music and throughout time and whatever. And the way I see it is like the internet just takes away the need for, like, if I was talking to someone who was 70 years old and explaining something about like Led Zeppelin or whatever, because maybe I'm wearing my Led Zeppelin shirt or something, and then they'll say, why are you listening to this? Shouldn't you be listening to something more, your own contemporary time? And I'm like, well, the internet, it's like if you can download an album that came out yesterday with a click of the mouse, or if you can download an album that came out 45 years ago with the exact same effort, there's actually no distinction between then and now. Like, everything just is available at the same time, busting down the barriers of space and time to get freaky with it. So, like, there's like that, just the access, the level of access and influence that you can get from that. It's like there's more good music coming out now than has ever happened before at any time, because more people have the ability to like listen to more widespread influences, and to like the way it's so much easier to release and record music and all these things. Like, there's more great music now than ever before. It's just you gotta sometimes know where to look, which is probably the tricky part of it. Because if you just listen to the radio, you're gonna hear the same 20 songs over and over and over, and they're gonna be the 20 songs that were designed in a studio algorithm to like sell the most copies. It's not gonna be the stuff that represents artists or whatever the best. So yeah, I think that the trick is just knowing where to look, and once you start looking, at least in my experience, it's just rabbit hole after rabbit hole. You find this album, and then you see an interview with the people who made this album, and they'll be like, well, I was writing this album, I was listening to this artist and this artist. You chase them back, and then everything leads to something else, and then you just end up going on just a delightful little weird trip of finding random music all over the place. And some of it'll be good, some of it'll be average, some of it'll be incredible, and every now and then you might find something that like changes your life a little bit. It's a difficult task because it does require a little bit of effort, but if you follow it through every now and then, when you do find that thing that's like revolutionary to your brainwaves, that is just the most amazing thing.
So for example, when I'm writing or in my work zone in the mornings, over the past week or so, there was, we talked about Peter Tosh, so I listened to a bit of Peter Tosh, and then also on my background music rotation has been a producer by the name of Derringer, who is the main producer behind the Griselda Records sound. So Griselda Records, if you don't know, have just taken over hip-hop. West Side Gun, Conway the Machine, Benny the Butcher. They're from Buffalo, and they are the hottest thing in hip-hop kind of over the last 12 months. And Derringer is one of their in-house producers who has cultivated a very unique, distinct sound. And Derringer was actually on an episode, maybe more episodes, but I have seen him on an episode of Fuck That's Delicious with Action Bronson and The Alchemist and Big Body Bears and Mayhem Lauren and all those dudes. So I do enjoy instrumentals, especially the high quality producers. So I've been listening to a bit of Derringer instrumentals, and also shout out to the Jay Dilla instrumental packages and those kind of things that you can get on YouTube as well. But I've been listening to Peter Tosh and Derringer for my workflow. What's been your background music of choice from the past week or so?
Generally when I'm looking for background noises when I'm writing, I just chuck podcasts on because they stimulate my brain in a different kind of way. Like, I find I get the music actually sits in the background when I listen to music while I'm writing, whereas if I have podcasts, like, I phase in and out, but it gets me thinking one way or another. Someone says something interesting and that sparks off especially if I'm writing about the NBA, I might chuck on like Zach Lowe's latest or Howard Beck or someone like that, and then that helps like stimulate the article I'm actually writing at the time. So that's more how I do it. I don't think I listen to music that much unless I'm trying to get through something like new and recent I haven't heard yet, and just giving myself a baseline to listen to it properly next time, I think. Something like that.
Well, so that's pretty interesting in itself. So I listen to music because it gets me in a groove. It gets me in a flow where I'm just like vibing with the music and everything just comes naturally. Because I've come to realize that it's less about me and my opinion. It's more about just being a vessel for the information, just getting the information out there. So less about my opinion and my judgments.
Yeah, I've had the exact same feeling too.
And it's just about getting the information out there and just flowing and vibing, and because all the information's in my head, because you do the research, you get into a little zone or whatever. So all the information's in my head, or I've taken notes wherever it is. And then it's just an exercise of being the vessel and just letting the information flow through you, through the keyboard onto the interwebs. So for me, there's kind of a overbearing nature of, because I like in between writing, or I'll listen to a little thing on YouTube like an interview, or I'll do that I'll listen to, like this morning I was listening to an interview with Eugene Behrman via Submission Radio, and I listen to that when I'm doing more like errands, work errands, like finding videos, finding music, or just, sharing stuff or this and that. But when I'm in the flow, I need music. I need like a groove. I need just a vibe to set me off. Because if I'm trying to type words and I'm listening to words, that doesn't work. That's like overbearing for me. That's like too much. There's just too many words floating around. So how do you juggle that? Like, you're writing words and then you're listening to words. You did mention that the podcasts you listen to are usually on topic to what you're writing. So I can see how that helps, but it's just a very weird, like, we've got very different styles, and I find the words on words on words a bit overbearing. So what do you reckon about that?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that we're talking about. It's just I'm sort of seeking out that overbearing thing, because it just keeps my mind like from falling into just not a dazed zone, but just like going through the motions. Like if it keeps me like just like on call, just sharp and effective, and just in terms of going through ideas in my head, even if they're not relevant, at least it's helping me like problem solve or figure things out at the same time, which can be distracting. But often, I mean, I'm going to get distracted one way or another while I'm writing. That's going to happen regardless. And I think if I am writing something a little more free associative or more creative or whatever, then say, for example, trying like some of the stuff I wrote last week about like Sean Mark's hiring Steve Nash. So I'm probably listening to a couple of different podcasts about that, getting some ideas and perspectives I haven't thought of, but also just like generally thinking, like getting my mind in that kind of NBA mind frame, considering I write about different sports. And sometimes you want that to, like, I think it's a benefit to be able to bring a different perspective from a different sport to another one. I've been writing about football all day and then I'm suddenly writing an NBA thing. Well, sometimes that's actually quite helpful to look at it from a different perspective, especially with American sports where everything is so like, just the way people, not at the top level, like the very best journalists are the very best for a reason, but then below that, there's just this overwhelming crowd of people who all write about or talk about the NBA or the NFL or whatever in exactly the same way, and they use the same phrases and the same ideas, and everything just feels so recycled and expendable. So having a different perspective is helpful, but I'm also like trying to keep on topic at the same time. So, but I would listen to more music if I was trying to write something that was less about that me trying to service an idea and more about me trying to do something a bit more creative like that. I certainly would chuck on some tunes and get myself in a different headspace where I'm a little more willing to like take risks and go out of the box with things. I think that's more, but it's the same process. I think what we're talking about, the difference is it's just a different sort of not different outcome, but a different intent for the same effect.
Beautiful. We'll get this flowing. We'll get a rolling. Lydia Ko. She was at the ANA Inspiration and she finished 6th, which was a very good result. Bunch of birdies in a final round. 6 birdies in her final round and a bogey took her all the way to 6th. And she finished 10 under for the whole tournament. Now, this was Lydia Ko's second top 10 finish since the LPGA restart. There have been 6 tournaments since the LPGA's restart, and Lydia Ko has 2 top 10 finishes and 4 top 20 finishes. So Lydia Ko is playing pretty good golf by the looks of it. Little weird thing that I've noticed is her average driving distance, and I don't know if this is, I know she's been real big into yoga over the past 12 to 18, 24 months, so that might help, or there might have just been some explosion of golf technology with the driver. I don't know, maybe a tailwind more often than not, who knows. I'm just pointing it out that her average driving distance has shot through the roof. So 2019, her average driving distance was 245 meters. In 2020, her average driving distance goes up to 257, so that's over 10 meters extra on her drives. And then at the ANA Inspiration, across those 4 rounds, her average driving distance was 271 meters. So that's well over 10 more meters to her driving distance. So somehow Lydia Ko has added 10, 15, 20 meters to her average driving distance. Variety of factors at play there, obviously. Like, who knows what the specific nugget is. Maybe a bit of yoga, although I think that has come at the expense of her driving accuracy, because right now in 2020 she is 62% driving accuracy, so that's, you know, how many fairways you hit pretty much, and she is ranked 123rd, where if we slide back to 2019, driving accuracy was up at 70%, so somehow Lydia Ko has added more distance to her drives, but her drives have got less accurate. However, she's winning, so that's pretty good. I like that. All right, Wildcard, can you take us through the bits and bobs, important information with the All Whites? Last week it was announced that the All Whites are going to be playing England, which is pretty cool. Take us through the fixture list and any funky bits and bobs about upcoming All Whites footy, because we both know the talent is there, but the All Whites just need to play games to start to find some chemistry together. Like, they just need to play games together to be able to flex all the golden age talent.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of guys in this group who, like, I mean, there's a lot of players coming through for sure, like Sarpreet Singh and fellas like that, Joe Bell, Libby Kikacha, etc., etc. We can go on all day about some of these guys, but there's also like the skeleton of the team that was already on its way to doing something all right. I don't think ever really clicked. Had some dodgy management over the last few years as well, but there was certainly already, like, with Winston Reid and Tommy Smith and Michael Boxall, like Chris Wood for sure, Stefan Marinovic. Like, there's already a good framework for a very decent team. So it's not like we're just expecting these young dudes to come in, like a bunch of 20, 21, 22-year-olds to come and just, like, run the show. Ryan Thomas too, of course. It's a point actually I sort of made a little bit in this week's Flying Kiwis, is that Ryan Thomas just seems to, like, it's obviously Chris Wood's playing at the highest level, scoring goals for Burnley, and what he does is amazing. But I don't think Ryan Thomas gets anywhere near like the credit he should for the fact that he's a regular starter for PSV Eindhoven, who are not at their best at the moment. They're in the Europa League this season, but often a team that's competing for titles in Holland and making Champions Leagues more often than not. Like, that's a strong team. That's a prestigious team. A lot of like legendary players have gone through those doors, and Ryan Thomas is there starting most weeks for them. I don't think people realize quite how good he is, but part of that's because like the Eredivisie in Holland is not as accessible as, for example, the Premier League, and when the All Whites don't play a lot of games, we don't actually get to see him doing much. Because I thought Ryan Thomas was superb certainly in that first game against Peru, which was November 2017. Like, those are the last meaningful fixtures the All Whites have played. We're nearly 3 years later, and they haven't done a whole lot since then. They had a friendly in Canada. They had that little tournament in India with a second string squad mostly, and then they had Danny Hayes' first couple games against Ireland and who was the other team? Lithuania or Belarus or someone like that. I forget off the top of my head, but like that was, I think, November last year. So not a lot has happened, and they were meant to be playing Bahrain and Oman in March. That got cancelled at the start of pandemic and lockdowns and all that. So they're coming out swinging with these new fixtures, and it's impressive sort of, it's just impressive kind of, I guess you'd say, work rate from guys like Danny Hay and whatnot to really get like into the, like, just to say we're going to play some games, we're going to make this happen one way or another. So they're playing Belgium on the 9th of October, so a little under a month. And then this game against England is a month after that, 13th of November. So, like, consecutive, they didn't play in the most recent, it was a week ago, there was the most recent international break, but they have fixtures lined up already for the following 2 international breaks. That does not yet, but hopefully will include an extra game for each of those, so that they play 2 games in each of the international weeks, which would be ideal. You want to at least get like bang for your buck with, especially when it's going to be such a pain in the ass to get like players from all around the world to have to bypass each of one of them with like unique travel restrictions and whatever from where they're coming from, where they're going to, etc. So you want to at least get a couple games in if you can. What I've heard is that Mexico and USA are hopefully being lined up for, like, they'll play one of them in each of those 2 international breaks, which a couple teams we've played relatively recently, but still a couple very good teams. I would imagine they'd be in a similar situation to us, where they'd mostly only pick European-based players, which enormous countries like those, they have even more of a capability. If we can do that, then they certainly can do that. So, I mean, that's if that goes ahead and they can get all 4 of those games, at the very least they'll get 2 of them, like two games against World Cup semi-finalists from last time. At the very least, they should get well, yeah, like there's plenty you can gain out of that. I mean, even playing in a empty Wembley Stadium, you're still playing at Wembley Stadium against England. I don't think New Zealand's ever played England in England before in a men's international fixture. The women played them in England before the last World Cup and beat them 1-0. Sarah Gregorius scored. So we've actually got a bit of form against the English football team in recent times. So, like, the one sort of kind of frisky aspect of this is that we're playing some very good teams with a squad that's going to be slightly weakened, certainly in the defensive side, because most of our best defenders play in America at the moment. So that is difficult. Like, that's going to make it a difficult, a couple difficult contests, potentially 4 difficult contests, which makes the results a little less meaningful, probably, which is frustrating because it's been a long time since we've seen the All Whites winning games against decent teams, and they have the capabilities of doing that. They're maybe not going to get the best, but I mean, you do what you can. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll beat England. England haven't been playing that well themselves recently either. So they're difficult games. It's going to be a massive test, but it's also like the most important thing is that they'll be playing games. They'll actually be getting some All White stuff. We'll actually get to see, Hopefully in all weights, midfield is still complications because they're all playing in 3 different countries. I know Joe Bell's under a bit of a, he'd have to do the quarantine thing, go back to Norway, even just traveling within Europe. So it's difficult, and that might mean he decides not to risk his position at his club squad. So we might not get the case, but if we can get our first proper glimpse of Sarpreet Singh, Joe Bell, Ryan Thomas in a midfield trio against a good team in a they're not a meaningful game, but it's still a competitive, organized fixture. That would be amazing. Get Chris Wood up front. We're still dealing with a lot of our best players, and just seeing them, getting them playing together, working on those combinations is what we want to see. It'll be fun. It'll be one way or another. It's definitely going to be a bit of an extravaganza to see the All Whites playing against dudes like Kevin De Bruyne and Romelu Lukaku and Harry Kane and etc. 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 It'll be something for sure.
It will be something for sure. Question for you here, Wildcard. Where does Scott Kugelheim rank in your Kiwi cricketers for the upcoming summer? Because he just finished first in all bowlers, all wicket takers. For the Caribbean Premier League 2020, Scott Kugelheim led them all. He had 17 wickets, average of 15, economy 7.7. Lost the final, but Scott Kugelheim definitely put himself in a good position coming forward to the Kiwi Summer. Do you see a future in which Scott Kugelheim has a massive Kiwi Summer wildcard?
I could do, for sure. I mean, if he's coming off a bit of... who was the last player that's gone to the Caribbean and done excellently and then come back and built on it was probably Glenn Phillips, who seems to do excellently every year he goes to the Caribbean. Plays a bit of 2020, then comes back and scores a bulk of runs for Auckland. So there's a precedent there. So, I mean, it certainly could be the case, and it'd be very good timing from him because he probably got a little bit of an easy run getting a bunch of 2020 games under his belt at a time when we were sort of maybe not taking the 2020s as seriously. Therefore, when he was getting pummeled around the park and not taking a lot of wickets, he was still playing a few games there, but been pushed back Kyle Jamison's come through and really cemented himself ahead of him, and then there's probably one or two other fellas pushing through at the same time. Kugelheim needs a little bit of needs to take his career to the next gear, and he's probably gone a very long way towards getting a good start on that one with a solid Caribbean Premier League. I mean, I tell you what, if you had listed all those players at the start, which we did, we talked about them beforehand, and who is going to have the best CPL of all these dudes, I don't think I would have picked Kugelheim, so fair play to him.
I was in the same boat with Kugelheim, and he's done the business over in the Caribbean. You mentioned Kyle Jamison. He's on the scene now. He's kind of better at doing what Scott Kugelheim does because he bats, he bowls pretty hostile deliveries, which is Scott Kugelheim's bowling shtick, I guess. One factor that I will chuck out for the start of the Kiwi Summer is you've got bowlers who I believe have a career-defining summer ahead of them, and those dudes have had plenty of injuries. I'm talking about the likes of Doug Bracewell, Adam Milne, those sort of characters who have missed a lot of cricket in the past few years via injury. They're going to be the type of bowlers to keep a close eye on coming into the summer. So it's not just Scott Kugelheim competing with the up-and-comers. Scott Kugelheim's trying to fight off those up-and-comers. He's trying to fight off Kyle Jamison. He's trying to fight off a Jacob Duffy or those type of characters who are looking to crack into the higher level. And Scott Kugelheim is trying to go toe-to-toe with bowlers who have been on the scene for a while but have either fallen out of favour or have had to battle endless injuries over the last few years, so keep an eye on that moving forward. And as you mentioned, Glenn Phillips, another fantastic CPL campaign. Unfortunately, in the final, Lendl Simmons hit 73 or some bullshit score, So he overtook Glenn Phillips at the top of the run scoring rankings. Lendl Simmons hit an 84 not out in the final. Glenn Phillips wasn't playing in that final, so he had already locked up his 316 runs at an average of 35.11, strike rate of 127. That was all locked in for Glenn Phillips. Lendl Simmons has a big final and he overtakes Glenn Phillips. But I think it's 3 CPL campaigns in a row of Glenn Phillips being in the top 5 run scorers. So that's a good little nugget for old G Philly. And over in England, we have Hamish Rutherford's had a good little period for Worcestershire in the T20 Blast. He hit back-to-back 40s, so 46 and a 41 over the weekend to go with previous scores of 5, 30, 22, 1. And all up, that gives Hamish Rutherford 145 runs at an average of 24, strike rate of 147. So he's giving it a fair old whack, and he's played 6 games. So I'll keep a close eye on that moving forward. And also, Auckland seamer Matt Quinn, or should I say sometimes Auckland seamer, because Matt Quinn is actually contracted to Essex. I believe he has a British passport, so he can do that as being a local player. And Matt Quinn has popped back to play for Auckland over the last few summers, playing predominantly white ball cricket for Auckland. So he does come back in the summer, in the England off-season. He's played 6 games and he has taken a wicket in every single game, which is fairly handy. That has resulted in Matt Quinn taking, 8 wickets at an average of 21.5, RPO of 7.8. And Matt Quinn also has a T20 overall career record of an average of 27. So Matt Quinn is he was a New Zealand under-19 seamer. He quickly moved into the Auckland Aces setup, and he's kind of fallen off the Kiwi cricket radar because of his move to Essex. But I am interested if he continues on this trajectory where his representative eligibility, something we usually talk about with rugby league and not so much with cricket, but Matt Quinn has shown over a long period of time that he's a fairly nifty seamer, and I just wonder where he'll end up. But he's got a long way to go, got to keep stacking up the wickets and doing some good things. IPL is starting on the weekend, I reckon, and don't care too much about the IPL. What I am interested in is the number of games players play. So it's you see all the headlines, Kane Williamson signed to blah, 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 Trent Boult, Lockie Ferguson, blah, blah, blah. You hear all the auction prices, you hear all the big headlines about the IPL deals and all that shit. Not too many Kiwi players play over 5 games in an entire IPL campaign. So I think the only players who played significant amounts of games last year were Kane Williamson, maybe, and Mitchell McGlenigan. Definitely Mitchell McGlenigan, because he's always available and he does a fairly good T20 job. But a lot of the Black Caps get sporadic appearances, so that's what I'm interested, just who plays the most games, as opposed to who does what in the games, because there's talent everywhere. But the thing about the IPL, very good YouTube content. So there's plenty of behind the scenes content on YouTube right now. If you just search for the various IPL teams and their own YouTube channels. I was listening to Mike Hesson talk about roles and responsibilities at his team. I'm not sure of the teams off the top of my head and which players are linked to where. A couple of Kane Williamson's first training session, Trent Boult broke a stump, which looked pretty feeble, so that was cool. Plenty of good content. I even saw one. This is an interesting drill to do. It was Virat Kohli's team, which might be Trent Boult's team as well. They were doing a Yorker drill for the bowlers, and it was like a competition, so there were a couple of different targets. But one thing that, if you're a bowler yourself listening to this, or your son's a bowler, or daughter's a bowler, your friend's a bowler, whatever, and you're trying to get them to bowl Yorkers, you can put the cones down, you can put the shoes down, and we've seen that before. Like, I've seen Lasith Malinga bowling at a pair of boots down the batsman end and just trying to hit the pair of boots, and that there's plenty of different methods to practice the Yorker. The new thing that I saw was laying stumps down on the crease. So you lay down the stump on the crease and you try and hit the stump. Now that seems a bit trickier, just feels a bit trickier than the cones and the boots. So get a stump down, lay it on the crease, and steam in, probably in a net session, and try and hit the stump laid down on the crease, because that's a good marker. So plenty of good training footage and behind the scenes footage, especially with the Kiwi lads as well over in the IPL. That's what I'm enjoying about the IPL, and it'll be interesting just to see how things develop over there with players getting opportunities. That's the most important thing. Finally, in this little opening segment, we have City Kickboxing have left Aotearoa, I believe, and there were a few issues. So because of the global situation, it's very difficult to transit in different countries, and UFC 253, headlined by Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa, that is being held in the UAE. So somehow City Kickboxing have to get from Auckland to the UAE in the space of a little over a week. So there are all sorts of different complications with that. And then I think it's just been finalized over the last few days. They're going to fly to Las Vegas and jump on the chartered flight from Las Vegas to the UAE. Because the great thing about this card is that there are 4 City Kickboxing fighters on the same UFC card. You got Israel Adesanya, Brad Riddell, Kai Kara France, and Shane Young. Shane Young's making a return after a long time away. And it's basically a City Kickboxing takeover of one UFC event. And there's an additional bit of information that I picked up. There are 2 fighters at City Kickboxing who are pretty much on the fringes of getting a UFC gig. They are Blood Diamond. I think he is Mike Blood Diamond. He is of African descent, but he's a pretty hardy Kiwi. I'll just find his last name is Diamond. Yeah, Mike Diamond. Mike Blood Diamond. You would have seen him in all the King of the Ring kind of events local in Auckland. He's right there. And Eugene Behrman was saying that the UFC have their eyes on Mike Blood Diamond and Carlos Ulberg, who is another guy who's been on all the King of the Ring kind of fight cards. The UFC is looking at them as the next fighters out of City Kickboxing to join the UFC. So the City Kickboxing New Zealand UFC takeover, like everything else, whether it be footballers, rugby league, whatever it is, New Zealand is taking things over. So be interesting to see the content coming out of the UAE with the City Kickboxing fighters. Brad Riddell does like vlogs and tutorials. There might be some engaged media might do some vlogs and stuff like that, so I'll keep a close eye on that, and we'll see how we go there, Wildcard.
Beauty. It's just takeovers on all fronts at the moment, isn't it? It's like every direction you look at, there's just another wave of Kiwi extraordinaires doing extraordinary things, eh?
Yeah, I'll just pull up the card and see how many fights there are. Because if you got 4 City Kickboxing fighters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 fights, and 4 of them involve Kiwis. So that's half the card. That's amazing. And it's being held in the UAE. So you got a Kiwi takeover of an event in the UAE, which doesn't make sense, but hey, it's 2020 and we're rocking and rolling.
Yeah, not a lot makes sense at the moment, eh? It's, I just got a thing that says the Breakers have signed their next, import fella. My phone just buzzed off while I'm recording. Have you ever heard of Colton Iverson? I've heard of Allen Iverson. I haven't heard of Colton Iverson. He's a big fella who is an experienced big man, is how they described it. So there we go. Doesn't really matter what they do with their. They had a big man import last year, didn't they? I can't even remember last season. It's been so long, and they've already said that the NBL won't start until. I think they said January now. They've pushed it through. It was hoping to start in December, and they've pushed it back even further again. It's just like nothing makes sense at the moment, eh? Like it's such a frustrating thing, because I tell you what, like this is what I was teasing before we started recording. But like I've been the NFL came back this week, and I've been watching a lot of the NFL. I'll probably watch some more. Steelers Giants starting around about now as we're recording, so watch the second half of that after we do this, and just like, and I wrote my quarterback rankings, and I wrote my my week one preview and all that, and just getting immersed in that world again. And one of the things I kept seeing a few times through those, like, because you remember at the start of and UFC is a good example of this, like at the start of when sports were first coming back, they were sort of talking about how you can do it, but you need to have the whole bubble thing going. Like you need to be able to have an isolated sort of ecosystem, so that you're not like you're not putting like the people at risk. You're not exposed to the virus from regular society. All these things, and the best example of that has been what the NBA has done, which is just like through the roof. I can't imagine the amount of like work that goes into setting up like the infrastructure for something like that. It's just incredible what they've achieved there with the NBA bubble. But we're also seeing a lot of sports coming back without bubbles at the moment, and part of that's because society's just coming back because people are retarded and don't think about like wider situations other than their own selfish interests, and so don't come to the idea about like maybe the lockdowns are happening for a reason, and if we wait another couple of weeks, then you don't have to come back in another month, or don't have to have maybe even 12 more months of this whole thing, as people don't seem to understand that. But anyway, there's some impatience with it, but there's also some like it's weird because it's happening at the same time as you get a lot of those like cities reopening around America. Was around the same time as you're getting like baseball coming back and MLS and things like that. And the stats in America, for example, America is just the worst example because America is literally on fire right now. But like it has been for a while in a few different versions. Like it's weird because you have that, and it's obviously like the numbers aren't going down properly. They're not flattening curves or whatever that people talk about because they're not like following rules and doing things smartly. And yet the NFL actually seems to be running quite well. Like if you look at the things, they're doing a lot of, they're not like this. You've still got home games and stuff. Most stadiums are mostly empty, and even when fans are coming into some of them, like obviously the fans are going to be coming in completely separate, no contact with players. Like you're not actually part of that bubble, as they say. Like it's I don't know, it's just a weird thing because the societal aspect of it isn't really working, but yet the NFL players aren't getting sick, and in the Premier League players aren't getting sick, and around the world and other things like the NRL players aren't getting sick. And it's funny because I think, like, I had to think about this for a while because I was seeing a lot of NFL writers on like the Monday morning quarterback type things saying how good it is that players have been so disciplined and whatever, and this system seems to be working, how well the NFL has worked it. And I can't remember who said it, but someone like sort of clicked a ball which made me understand what all this was going on for. And when he like I can't remember who it was. I think it was on Bleacher Report or something like that, but I forget who the writer was. But it said like what we need to do here is mostly like put the majority of, like, sure, the NFL's put in the right procedures to make this work, but the people we got to put like the majority of the credit towards are the players, because the players are not just. It's like that thing about driving a culture. And I remember listening to Stan Van Gundy on the NBA commentary the other day talking about player call. I can't remember which team he was talking about, but he said the biggest misnomer about team culture is that it's driven by a coach, because it's not. It's driven by your playing group, specifically the leadership team and amongst your players, but like from top down to bottom, everyone has to have those standards or it doesn't work. And it's interesting, and like this was the point that was made about NFL players, is that they're listening to what they're being told, they're following instructions, they're not out there breaking curfews and whatever, and they're getting tested at the right time, they're making sure that everyone else knows that these are the standards that you have to adhere to if you want to have a season. And they're basically just doing the right thing the whole way through, and that's why the NFL season has been able to kick off and work. And I realized when I was reading this, like, oh, right, that makes so much more sense. Because when you think about it, and NFL is an extreme example of this too, because it's such a segmented sport. It's almost like you watch those Hard Knocks things. It's like you're watching military training. Everyone's getting these exact, like, you got to play to the exact playbook, and like positions only worry about their own positions. And there's just sort of a belief that everything will work in a fully functional machine if everyone does their own little job. And that kind of mentality works so well when it comes to something like avoiding an infestation of a global pandemic. Like, those players are just, I think sports people in general, because I think this is why we're seeing these work even beyond, like the bubble thing works on its own because the bubble takes care of this, but we're also seeing it working without bubbles now in a way that people didn't think they could, because I think sports people just have that mindset of a team first mentality and knowing like how to make sacrifices in order to achieve a bigger goal, and all those little kind of aspects that go into the mindset, the culture, just the general like genetic makeup even of a professional athlete are the kind of things that make them well versed in being able to like do what they do amidst a pandemic, whereas regular society full of people who are lazy and don't think about team first mentalities and things like that just seem to be struggling in general to get a grips on the whole situation, particularly worldwide. We're quite lucky in New Zealand that we're a bit better at this whole thing, but it's like also not New Zealand sports that we're talking about. We're talking about Premier League, we're talking about NFL, we're talking about the UFC, for example, and various other, like, all these other sports that are able to find a way to work in this environment. I think that's probably why. I think it's because, at least that's the theory I'm working with, that players just have the right kind of, like, intellectual makeup to be able to function, whereas it doesn't seem to work in regular society, and that's probably why they're professional athletes and the rest of us aren't.
Righty ho. I agree with everything you said there. I don't have much to add, and that should have been like an opening monologue or some shit. That was nice. I like it. Maybe we have to look into a bit of an opening monologue. On the back of it, I will add that I just had to. I was like overtaken. I don't know what the word is, but it was just a weird sense over the last week because NFL is back. And when this all started, there was no certainty that NFL would just come straight back as it did, and NFL just came straight back as it did, and suddenly, those within the know of football. Soccer football, not American football, they would have known that there's another football season, I don't know if you can call it a season, but football was just starting straight up again, and it's just rolling on. So generally, we're in a very weird space. It feels like everything is just trying to break free, and everything kind of is breaking free, and yet we're still like halfway in pandemic times, halfway not, because as you said, the sports people and the mindset of sports people, I'd extend it to coaches and management and stuff like that. Like, if you're involved in sports, you've got a certain mindset.
Yeah,
like, it's
sure.
just a weird time where those those involved in the sports have laid it all out. They've poured everything out to ensure that the sports happens, and that's great. And now it's just like, are we actually in a pandemic or are we not? And I don't want to use this as a time to discuss the positives and negatives on that internationally, and given the current climate of certain countries and stuff like that. I would just put it as it's a weird spot we're in, where a lot of at the start of the pandemic, NFL was so low down on my things that I thought that I would see in 2020. Here we are. We got full banger NFL games. It's kind of cool because we're seeing Tom Brady play for Tampa Bay. We're seeing Cam Newton play for New England. So many different bits and bobs. If you love sport, you're enjoying the different bits and bobs and narratives and storylines that the NFL or the NBA, it's everywhere. The NRL is full of them. We've got NPC Mitre 10 Cup rugby with All Blacks in every single team, and it's amazing. I don't give a shit about watching All Black rugby right now. I just want to see Mitre 10 Cup rugby because I love it. It's cool. It's awesome. Without going into any of those tangents or rabbit holes, it's just very weird because all that stuff's happening and we're whipped up in it and we're enjoying it, and that makes you feel like the pandemic is over. So are we in the pandemic? Are we out of the pandemic? Because regardless of what the rules and regulations and what the Prime Minister says or whatever like that, you got to go on what you feel. And if people feel like the pandemic's over, they're going to act like the pandemic's over. And if people feel like they're still stuck in the pandemic, they're still going to be stuck in it. So I don't know what the point of that was. It's just very weird. It's very strange where we are right now, mid-September. We're kind of between worlds.
Which is why I felt weird about it at first until I sort of clicked onto the reason why. Because it's like if you turn on the TV and you see your backyard on the TV and it's a beautiful sunny day, but then you open the curtains, look out the window, and it's pouring with rain. It's like, this is the exact same scene. How come on TV it looks all sunny and out the window it looks all rainy? What's going on here? And I guess when we often talk about, anyone talking about sports, you often talk about there's a recurring theme of recognizing excellence and things like that. And if you're watching the Olympics, you're watching the 100-meter sprint because you want to see who the fastest person on the planet is, and it's we're acknowledging the very, very best in our society at this, but we're acknowledging them as the very best for physical reasons and whatever. And we're also probably seeing at the moment they're the very best physically because they're able to be the very best mentally in these certain ways as well. I'm not talking about solving complex algebra equations or whatever, but the discipline that it takes to be a professional sportsman and sportswoman and those kind of things. It's one of those. I mean, it's another one of those beautiful situations where everything is connected, and you can't just be the best physically without also being the best at other things. You're at least in that top tier, and that's probably the reason for that weirdness, why it looks cloudy out the window and sunny on TV, is because we actually are looking at, in many ways, the best of society doing what they do. And there's a reason they're able to do it. It's not because, it's stopped raining. It's just because they've figured out how to, they're the people who are best equipped to work through that. So I think you probably hinted at a point which is maybe that actually gets a little bit dangerous for society sometimes when people, particularly in countries outside of our own one, where there actually are uncontrolled community outbreaks. If people start thinking that everything's all fine and dandy and they start living their lives as they would before, I guess as long as there's empty crowds and empty stadiums in these sports, things are going to have at least enough of an element of weirdness so that we can't get fully comfortable, because that is that has been strange in a different way. I think we've talked about this too in different episodes of the podcast. The strangeness isn't so much watching athletes do what they do in an empty stadium. The strangeness is in seeing broadcasters trying to come to terms and downplay or explain or whatever why there's an empty stadium, and coming up with like the I want to read more into how they did this, but the NFL apparently, which is probably a sport which is quite easy to do this in because of the segmented nature of it, they've tried to recreate the crowd noises for each individual team, so that, for example, when the Pittsburgh Steelers throw a touchdown or whatever, they'll get the crowd noise of a touchdown being scored by the Pittsburgh Steelers at their own stadium from like the last couple years, merge them together, make a that's your default sound that you're going to hear. So it is actually still a Pittsburgh Steelers crowd, but it also sounds weird because you don't know a touchdown's going to be scored until it's scored. So there's like a second or two of of slightly delayed noise. At least that was the impression I had on the first Monday of games. So maybe that's not true. I don't know, but yeah, it's all still a general weirdness. It's just the weirdness has moved slightly. It's been shifted into a different perspective.
I'd sum it up by saying, if you're a professional sport competition or just a professional sport in general, for me, it's weirder if that sport hasn't already restarted, nothing's happened. Because you got cricket happening. We're about to have women's cricket with the White Ferns. You got the IPL, the CPL. There's cricket being played in England, international cricket. Football's happening around the world. All the American sports are happening. Everything's just happening. NRL's happening. Super Rugby's happening in Australia. All the sports are happening. So it's just weird. It's just a weird time. Let's keep it moving.
Well, we can keep it moving sort of on that topic, because where it gets weird, I think, we've established that players and coaches and teams specifically seem to be able to handle this complex, strange environment full of moving parts or whatever. But I think where it gets confusing is that I don't think the other aspects that allow for sports to exist have got a grip on that, because what we're just saying about the Aussie NBLs had to push back, and I think financial reasons or whatever, and this falls into the same situation that the Wellington Phoenix are in with Stephen Taylor leaving, because as has been established, he would not have, he signed a 2-year extension at the start of the year. He would not have left had it not been for pandemic related reasons. But we don't know when the next A-League season's going to happen. And, I mean, the Phoenix did what they did, same as the Warriors did what they did in getting the season going. Had to live away from home, big sacrifices and all this, and they made it work. And the administrative side of the sport then has to figure, what's the next A-League season going to look like? How's this going to go? And it's not all the A-League's fault either. It's Fox Sports' fault mostly, because they used the pandemic as a reason to renegotiate their broadcast rights, which meant that when everyone came back for the restart, everyone had to take a 30% pay cut or something stupid. And Stephen Taylor, I saw alluded to, I hadn't read this before, so I don't know if it's 100% true, but I saw it alluded to that he had apparently taken even more of a pay cut so that other people could get paid as well still. But now, they're having to renegotiate the collective bargaining agreement before they can move forward on a new season, because there's less money coming in from broadcasters, which means that another pay cut was coming, which means that when he gets a tap on the shoulder, apparently from the Indian Super League or whatever, but I don't know if that's true or not, but that has been rumored. It's also where Gary Hooper seems likely to be headed. You get a tap on the shoulder and they say, in the middle of a global pandemic, we can offer you what you were getting before or something close to it. You sort of, if you're Stephen Taylor, you kind of unfortunately have to listen to those offers, and he was reluctant to leave, but you can't blame him at the same time. And this is where that, if we talk about the players and everything, able to maneuver their way through this situation, I think we're seeing a recurring theme of administrators not being able to do the same thing, and that is basically why the Wellington Phoenix seem like they're not so much having to rebuild again, but that is they knew they were going to lose Libby Kakache. You can't keep a caged bird forever, you got to let him spread his wings. Callum McCall was in a similar situation. I think he was always likely to leave for Europe after one season with the Knicks. That's fine, that was expected, but losing their captain, losing their inspirational centre-back, who had no intention of leaving, who had spoken of potentially retiring with the Phoenix, that is a massive blow that they're going to have to work very hard to overcome. And I don't know what the A-League is going to look like next season. I already figured there was probably a good chance that they had, that they would at least lower the import allowances, because imports tend to be the most expensive players. Not every team is going to be able to afford them. It's now not impossible that they might not be able to retain any of their imports, and then you're in a weird situation there if Stephen Taylor's exit leads to David Ball and Ulysses Davia suddenly rethinking their situation as well, and especially Ball, who got on very well with Taylor because they're both English fellas, and this leaves the Phoenix in a tricky situation. I wouldn't quite say a situation where they have to rebuild as they have the last 2 years, because I think you still got a solid core of a team, you still got a returning coach, you still got most of the good elements of a strong team. That's just they're not going to be quite the same team. They're going to need to replace some of these dudes who have left, and that's not going to be easy if they can't afford to hire decent imports, and if a lot of teams around the league hopefully don't either. And that's where I think that's probably the hope, is that if the Phoenix are being crippled by this, probably everyone else will as well. So it will actually, it at least, compared to the two rebuilds they had to do the last 2 years, at least this one is from a situation that affects the wider A-League fraternity. But yeah, right now, it seems like the Wellington Phoenix, who already have a difficult situation as the only Kiwi team in an Aussie competition, it's always been difficult for them keeping their heads above water in the A-League, have their best ever season in terms of regular season, and now they're still bloody global pandemic complicating things. But right now, I don't think they can really, they haven't re-signed anyone yet, and I think that's not a coincidence, because I don't think they really, it's just bad business to be re-signing people right before a new CBA gets agreed. So I don't think they can do anything, their hands are kind of tied until that happens. It's cost them, Stephen Taylor has cost them their captain, one of their very best players, and could potentially cost them more as well, because we don't know how the fallout will happen afterwards. It's just right now the Wellington Phoenix, who are a sterling example of players going above and beyond in order to keep sports happening and rolling along, are very much handcuffed by administrators right now. And I think that's a little bit of a theme in terms of why some leagues are back up and running, why some still, for whatever reason, don't seem to be or can't get out of their own way. Generally think that's coming down to an administrative side of things, and sometimes that is, there's obvious complications with the finances and stuff to work through. That's not all, board members' faults and whatever, but also we've seen way too many examples in recent times of sports administrators who can't seem to get out of their own way in terms of old-fashioned thinking and not being flexible and those kind of things. And those are not skills whatsoever that apply themselves nicely to the current situation that we're in, which is anything but inflexible.
There you go. Breaking it down. So it's also you got to be a well-run organization these days, don't you? You got to be on your P's and Q's, or else you're going to be faced with an issue. There's from an NRL perspective, there doesn't feel like there's going to be too much of a flow-on ramifications for next season, because there was concern and noise around the dropping of the squad sizes. So right now, NRL clubs have to have 30 players in their top 30, full-time contracted players. That was going to be dropped, but I think that's going to remain the same at 30, and the change will be in a bit of the salary cap value. So I think that's it. But part of that, we'll get back to your Flying Kiwis, and then we'll finish with a quick wrap-up of NRL. We won't go too long there. We've chewed plenty of fat on this one. I am interested in the mechanisms of competitions moving forward, because there's how do you figure out what's going to happen? We've seen it with the Rugby Championship. We've seen the value in strictly operating a domestic competition. So we've seen that with Super Rugby Aotearoa. We're seeing that now with NPC Mitre 10 Cup Rugby. And then you've got stuff like the Rugby Championship. You've got stuff like the NRL. Are the Kiwis going to go play tests? Like all the foundations on which New Zealand sports, will stick with the New Zealand bubble, all those like sporting competitions in those sports, all the foundations that they were established on, that's been taken away. And so now one of the themes that we spoke about throughout the pandemic was how you're going to emerge from the pandemic and what changes are going to be made. I'm still very interested in that and see like how it shakes up to, does it lead to more creativity and competitions and stuff like that? But you got to be, it's just a weird hodgepodge of ideas, wildcard. Weird hodgepodge of ideas. But we got plenty of sports to enjoy. So, and unfortunately, it's resulted in old Stephen Taylor making way. Bit of a bummer there. He picked up the baton from Andrew Durante, and that was a beautiful thing. The stalwart centre back, the clubman. That's what you want. That's what every football team needs. And now it's gone. So we'll see. We'll wait and see what the Wally Phoenix do. Run us through your Flying Kiwis smorgasbord. Pick a few key ones that you want to touch on.
Yeah, well, I will just say with the Welly Knicks, there is obviously also the potential, silver lining to a dark cloud, which is that if, currently they have 0 centre-backs under contract, so they're going to need to sign a few from somewhere. If they can get an import centre-back, I think that would be highly recommended. It might have been recommended anyway. Will Luke De Vere want to come back? Don't know, but there is the potential silver lining of, well, if you need to find some decent centre backs in a hurry, it does so happen that the Kiwi Premiership does have a few worthwhile. Adam Mitchell and Fox Slotmaker, off the top of my head, automatically should be in contention for at least a cheeky trial or two. Those two are easily good enough to be Slotmaker's played very well at an Aussie state level in the past. Adam Mitchell's played professionally all over Europe. Those two, just right without even thinking about it, there's two guys right there who could be solid professional players for the Wellington Phoenix, potentially even with very high upsides to them as well. So, if that is a situation that they find themselves in, there are a lot of good players in New Zealand who are awaiting a decent opportunity to climb up the ranks, be it for the Welly Knicks or potentially for the old Flying Kiwis here. I think the most notable result of the weekend was probably Rebecca Stott's Brighton and Hove Albion holding Manchester City in the WSL to a 0 draw. That was the first game that City have played in 200 days, their first game since everything got called off last season with the pandemic. So they were a little bit rusty and some of their finishing was shocking, but also Brighton had a superb defensive organisation, which is amazing when you think about Rebecca Stott's playing one of the centre backs there, and it's a second game for the club. How are they so good defensively against one of the very best teams in Europe? It's they haven't even had that much time to practice this, and they're already at this level. So that's impressive. They drew that game 0-0, so that's a pretty fantastic result actually for a mid-table team to be taking points off one of the top. Because what we've seen early on in this WSL season is that the difference between, there's been a massive influx of amazing players, some of the best players from America, best from Australia as well, all signing in the WSL. Pernille Harder signing with Chelsea, the highest transfer for a female footballer in history. I was reminded, researching Flying Kiwis as well, that Pernille Harder did Ali Riley's podcast a couple months ago too, so people can check that one out. But yeah, most of those players are going to the top clubs, and so the gap between the top 4 clubs and everyone else is kind of growing substantially. And you've seen I think Arsenal won 9-1 on the weekend, and I think they won 7-1 the week before that. I think it was 6-1 the week before that against Erin Naylor's Reading. Erin Naylor was on the bench, so at least she didn't have to pick the ball out of her own goal 6 times in that one. So there's been some hefty, big results, and so for Brighton to hold Man City to a 0 draw is pretty remarkable. Elsewhere than that, we didn't really get any goals this week, and there were a couple transfers to mention Ollie White signed with Istanbulspor in the second tier in Turkey. That's pretty cool. One that I'd missed at the time, Jana Radosavljevic has signed with Werder Bremen in the German Bundesliga. So she was playing for Kloppenburg in the second tier. So she's wrapped up that contract and moved up a division. That's awesome. She made a debut for the club over the weekend, which is how I realized I'd missed that one. If I've missed it as well, everyone else has missed it, so I'll point that out. I didn't see that mentioned anywhere else from our esteemed football media community. I don't know. I don't really know what else has stood out. I suppose the thing to mention is old mate Ryan Thomas, who I said before. Like, PSV Eindhoven's season just started. They had a cheeky 3-1 win over Groningen, which was overshadowed by the fact that Ian Robin came out of retirement to play for Groningen and then went off injured after like 25 minutes, which is an extremely Ian Robin storyline, really. And Chris Wood starts his Premier League season, I think, next week for Burnley. They've got a League Cup game before that. So while we've been sort of shuffling around all these great transfers and whatever, I think also we're at a point now where these new seasons are starting and the very, very best of the Flying Kiwis brigade, like not just the up-and-comers, but like the ones who have been at this level for several years and dominating, are about to step back into the spotlight again. Chris Wood, I tell you what, like I know they're only friendly games, but he scored in basically every preseason game he's played this in between these two campaigns, I think. He finished last season in great form, and he seems to be carrying it on. So if he can stay healthy for this upcoming Premier League season, like that dude could score 20 goals. Like there's huge expectations that are like reasonably huge expectation as well, like reasonable in that they're realistic. He could have a huge season if he can like follow on where he left off, and the way he's been playing in preseason. That is something to get pretty fizzed for, mate. Pretty fizzed.
Pretty fizzed. Or frothing. Fizzed or frothing is usually...
Or frothing, either way.
They're
whatever
usually
suits.
the words I go for. Any other Flying Kiwis matters?
There's more or less that. I did enjoy seeing James Musa and Michael Boxall starting in the same team for Minnesota, although they were playing against Sporting Kansas City, and Winston Reid is currently injured. This Winston Reid thing, like, I don't tend to get very editorial in Flying Kiwis. I just try to paint a little picture of the game and explain the situations, but I don't get into like opinions. But it's like, remember when Winston Reid came back and we were talking about how he was like, he hadn't played a game for like 900 days or whatever. And then they played him like 3 starts in a week. And what do you know? He got injured in the third one and hasn't played for 2 weeks since. Like, I just can't get over how weird that is, that they were so patient with him at first and not playing him. And then as soon as they play him once, they play him 3 times in about 8 days. And of course he gets injured. Like, that just seems so reckless to me. The guy sliding under the radar though, who is on the verge of a little breakout in the MLS, is Elliot Collier for Chicago, who has he's gotten to the point where he's getting big cameos every game. He's played like at least 30 minutes in I think their last 4 or 5 games, including he started one when their striker, who had not scored a goal for ages, got rotated out. Like, there's heaps of fixtures in a row, so there's a lot of rotation going on, which is why Musa's getting good games at the moment, and etc. And Collier seems to be getting a lot of minutes. He's just like, he's had a few chances, and he should have set up a goal. They drew 2-2. They were 2-0 up after 15 minutes, and he came on about half an hour into the game when someone else got injured. Comes on in the left wing. Like, Collier's a little bit of a he can look like a bit of a messy player sometimes. Like, sometimes his touch is sloppy, and then other times his touch is just amazing. And there was one example where he did both of those at once. Like, his first touch was bad, defender follows him out to try tackle, and then he throws a couple step overs, skins him, and then cuts a beautiful ball to the far post at a time when I think it was 2-1. With about 5 minutes to go in Chicago's game against, I can't even remember who they were playing. Squares it right to the far post. Guy gets there, easy tap in, and he kicks it instead of just straight in front of him where all he's got to do is get a touch. He kicks it way too hard, and it comes back across the goal into the goalkeeper who's standing at the near post. So he misses a wide open goal that would have put them up 3-1. They ended up conceding the equalizer like 2 minutes later. So There's been a few of those kind of hard luck stories with Elliot Collier, but he's getting a lot of minutes for Chicago. This is a guy who had to trial for his spot at the start of preseason, scored a bunch of goals there, worked his way in, continuing to work his way in, getting a lot of game time at the moment, and we're just sort of on that brink where one day soon he's going to score like a crucial goal or get a double or set up a couple goals or whatever. Like he's going to have that big game soon. He just hasn't quite had it yet, but I can feel it pulsing.
I can feel Roger Tuivasa-Sheck pulsing as well, because he's always pulsing. He never stops fucking pulsing. I ran some stats, Wildcard. I ran some stats on Roger Tuivasa-Sheck in 2020 as captain of the New Zealand Warriors. He is 5th in post-contact meters, and he is 5th in tackle bus. Now, that may be due to the fact that he is 1st in total runs. So if you have the most runs, there's a high chance that you might have the most post-contact meters, or the most tackle bus. Maybe both. And that's pretty cool, but when you break it down and you start to think, well, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck averages 22.47 runs per game. And every time he takes one of his runs, he averages 3.26 post-contact meters per run, and he averages 4.83 tackle bus per run. So when Roger Tuivasa-Sheck runs, he's either going to make post-contact meters or he's going to break your tackles. Probably he's going to break your tackles and then make post-contact meters per run. So that's Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, ladies and gentlemen, and that's running a few of those stats and just thinking about Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. I think I'm going to write about Roger Tuivasa-Sheck tomorrow, just about Roger Tuivasa-Sheck and the season he's had. Obviously, a variety of factors here. And I have just seen, shout out to Adam Blair, his grandmother passed away during the week, last week. She apparently got some form of cancer back earlier in the year. And unfortunately, she passed away up north, leading into the Cronulla Sharks game. So shout out to Adam Blair, who I believe has had a good season and has a lot of value to the Warriors moving forward, assuming that he does take up his play option. And there's a lot of noise to add to that. There is a lot of noise around Benji Marshall and Kieran Foran. They are both looking for clubs. The West Tigers no longer want Benji Marshall. The Bulldogs and Kieran Foran couldn't come to an agreement. I don't think you're going to see Kieran Foran come... No, neither of them are going to have to go to New Zealand if they wanted to join the Warriors, because to the best of my knowledge, the New Zealand Warriors will be based in Australia next season, unless there is some sort of COVID miracle. So neither Kieran Foran or Benji Marshall would have to move to New Zealand. That's an interesting thing. But the reason I bring them up is because the Warriors are not being mentioned as a possible destination for Benji or Kieran Foran. And the Warriors have two young halves. They got Cody Nikorima, they got Chanel Harris-Tavita, and they have Paul Turner coming through. So more with Benji, I reckon he could have an interesting role with the Warriors as a co-matua, teacher, experienced half to lead Cody Nikorima and Chanel Harris-Tavita forward. I'll just throw it out there. I've just been thinking about it, obviously to a lesser extent with Kieran Foran, because he probably wants to start, and Benji Marshall can still start, but I think he's just got so much value to add to a young halves group at the Warriors. Same with Adam Blair. A lot of young forwards at the Warriors, and they need the experience of Blair. And I reckon the halves need some experience and guidance from Benji Marshall as well. So just chucking that out there.
It makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense. Can I just say on Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, I might be wrong here, but wasn't there a point like 6 or 7 games into the season where he hadn't even had a line break? Like, wasn't there some streak like that where he wasn't getting through at the start, and then to have him up near the top in all them numbers now probably suggests that his back half of the season, which adds up to the eye test because it seems like he's been pretty amazing recently, that also, I mean, unless I'm getting this mistaken, but I'm sure there was a point where, like, we were talking about how Roger Tuivasa-Sheck just hadn't had the influence on games that he normally does.
Yeah, so he got lots of tackle busts and he got lots of post-contact meters in the, first 7-8 games. So that's why he's highly ranked in post-contact meters and tackle busts. But to your point, he didn't have a try or a line break in the first 7 games.
Right,
and since then, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 line breaks. He's scored 4 tries. And he's had 3 try assists. So a lot of that has come in the stretch of games that I've written a lot about over the past few weeks. So in round 11, the Warriors played the Roosters. And they lost that game. But you could see something different in the Warriors. That was after they got beaten quite heavily by the Cronulla Sharks. Then they played the Roosters, and there was a different attitude, a different energy to the Warriors. And everything changed after that Roosters game. They defeated the West Tigers, they defeated the Sea Eagles, lost to the Panthers, defeated the Bulldogs, and defeated the Knights. And now they've lost 2 games, but that's all good. And so basically, my Warriors, like I mentioned, the first 7 rounds for Roger Tuivasa-Sheck there, but my Warriors season is split before round 11 versus the Roosters and after round 11 for the Roosters, because a lot of things changed. Stuff that can't be measured, just attitude, vibe, energy and that stuff, and stuff that can be measured, like Tuivasa-Sheck's scored 4 tries in that time. He's had 5 line breaks in that time. He's had 2 try assists. None of that was present in the first, 7 games. Jazz Tavanga came into the starting lineup. I think he maybe round 9 or 10, and then he's came in. And I wrote about this last week in my Diary of a Warriors Fan, so read that. A lot of the stuff still applies, even though they lost to the Sharks. Because it's not about Jazz Tavanga being a better player than Adam Blair. It's just about what their role is. And Adam Blair has been very good in a bench role. Jazz Tavanga has been very good in a starting role. For whatever reason, the Warriors are better when Carl Lawton starts at hooker. And that was the other change. Earlier in the season, Wade Egan was starting at hooker. And then Carl Lawton, for a while there, he was plugging different holes. He was playing edge forward. A whole lot of weird shit. But he moved into the starting hooker role. And that was part of the round 11 switch in their season. So it's not like Carl Lawton's a better hooker than Wade Egan, because I've seen and I highlighted some things that Wade Egan does where he'll take a few steps out of dummy half, but he'll straighten and engage the marker, and then he'll either pass across the back across the ruck, or he'll pass out from the ruck after that little straightening up little thing that he does. And that's cool. But then on top of that, you've seen Roger Tuivasa-Sheck hang around the ruck a lot more. So if Wade Egan's getting out of dummy half and he pops over to the right and he engages that marker, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck's hanging around the ruck and he's pushing up in support. Those are some things that have changed. But again, going back, so it's not that Carl Lawton is better than Wade Egan, because there's a lot of good things that Wade Egan does, but for whatever reason, it's just the sussing out the roles, and Carl Lawton being the starter, Jazz Tavanga being a starter. Jack Murchie's been pretty good starting this season as well. And it did coincide loosely with their families being able to move over to Australia. So for someone like Peter Hiku, his last 8 games have been amazing. One of the best attacking centers in the NRL. I reckon he's better than Zach Lomax. You might disagree there, but I reckon he's better than Zach Lomax. So for Peter Hiku, his season is clearly defined by when his family joined him in Australia. So that's a factor as well. And there's a lot of different little bits and bobs like that throughout the Warriors lineup that have been interesting. And a couple more Warriors thoughts here. There's always plenty of Warriors writing, so read about it for the more in-depth thoughts. But off the top of my head here, Wildcard, I reckon Jazz Tavanga should be in a Kiwis squad. And I think Jazz Tavanga has to be viewed among the likes of Braden Hamlin-Uele, Josh Aloiai, Marata Niokori, those forwards who are just a level below James Fisher-Harris, Nelson Asafa-Solomona, Joseph Tapine. And James Fisher-Harris is a top 3 NRL middle forward right now. However, in the Aotearoa Kiwis mana rankings, you've got Jesse Bromwich, you've got Jared Wairau-Hargreaves, you've got maybe Tohu Harris. He hasn't played a lot of Kiwis footy recently. He hasn't actually played under Michael Maguire for the Kiwis, so I'd chuck him in there because he's an amazing player. But from like a Aotearoa Kiwis, Michael Maguire era, Jesse Bromwich and Jared Wairau-Hargreaves are the leaders. They're the big dogs, and they should be there starting every game that they play. And then below that, on a mana respect experience level, you've got Fisher-Harris, Asafa-Solomona, Joseph Tapine, and then you've got a level below that with the likes of Britton Nakora, Corey Harawira-Naira, Braden Hamlin-Uele, those type of characters. And I reckon Jazz Tavanga's got to be there. You can't, no one can watch Jazz Tavanga play and think he doesn't add something on the field. And I'm not sure if we talked about it last week, Wildcard, but that Parramatta Eels game against the Warriors, Jazz Tavanga was all over the Eels forward pack. It was kind of portrayed as if Nathan Brown antagonized Jazz Tavanga and he did it. Nathan Brown was a possum in the headlights. He didn't know what the fuck to do with Jazz Tavanga. Jazz Tavanga was all over him. And then I go back a week before that, and I remember against the Knights, Jazz Tavanga tackled Kalen Ponga and then stood over him and whispered in his ear as he played the ball. And that's an intangible that I reckon Jazz Tavanga offers, let alone his bouncing around. He makes a lot of meters for a little bloke. I reckon he should be in a Kiwis squad contention. He's got to be there. He's an absolute baller. And that goes back to the Warriors having more players who are naturally skilled. Jazz Tavanga, Peter Hiku, Chanel Harris-Tavita. He's a natural rugby league player. Cody Nikarima, he's naturally just talented at rugby league and those sort of type of characters. The other thing with the Warriors that I've been watching of late is Hayes Perham at centre. I reckon he's a very good centre. He's got good footwork. He's not overly big, but he makes meters. He's skillful. If you think about Sonny Bill Williams in the middle of the field for the Roosters, I talked about it last week with the offloads, but I was thinking about it a bit more. And if you're in the midfield in a game of rugby union, especially high-level rugby union, you need to be able to pass 10 meters left to right and right to left. So that basically translates to you need to be able to throw a spiral pass left to right and right to left, because the spiral pass is more prominent in rugby union because they pass over a longer distance. You don't see the spiral pass as much in rugby league because they're usually passing a shorter distance. But if you play midfield in rugby union, you need to spiral pass both ways. And those are the skill elements that differentiates New Zealand rugby from other countries, because the forwards can all spiral pass both ways and little details like that. Hayes Perham, he was a midfielder in rugby union. So he's got those, a skill set that is Peter Hiku-ish in the sense that he's got great hands and he's got great feet. Hayes Perham's got very good footwork as well. So I think there's an interesting situation with the Warriors. Obviously, they signed Ewan Aitken. He's coming over. And the Warriors are going to have Peter Hiku, Ewan Aitken, and the curveball, the bit of funk, is Hayes Perhams looked pretty good in the centres for the Warriors over the last few weeks, and I'm very interested in his development. So if you want to add something in there, otherwise I've got a bit of a tirade with regards to centres, Wildcard.
Well, I would like to hear a tirade, but I can't allow our listeners to think that I've just let that Zach Lomax slander slide through untouched. Let that one through to the wicketkeeper. I'm definitely going to throw a bat at that one outside of. But what I will say on that is that right now Zach Lomax is playing outside Corey Norman, who's playing terribly. I don't know what's happened to his form, but he's been pretty rotten all season, and people didn't put the pressure on him at the start because Ben Hunt was playing even worse. Ben Hunt moves to dummy half. Cam McInnes moves to lock. Suddenly Norman's and Adam Clune comes in and plays halfback and plays very well. He's the Dragons' best half at the moment, his first season in NRL. Norman has been exposed in recent weeks as being considerably playing within his potential. But then I was actually talking about this with my brother the other day, who watches more NRL than I do, and he said, well, the problem with Corey Norman is that he's just a little bit of a jack of all trades, and all the best halves are like amazingly good at least one thing. Like they're either a great ball runner or a fantastic playmaker, or it's they're like, Cameron Munster runs the hell out of the ball. Adam Reynolds kicks the ball better than anyone off the tee or off his boot in play. I mean, so there's an aspect of that which led into a conversation. Like that's just a little aside, but it led into a conversation about how his theory is that, you remember at the start when they changed the ruck rules when they're first coming back, and it was the talking heads in the NRL sort of community would talk about how like, oh, this is going to be a golden era for like dummy halves because the game's going to be quicker and whatever, and the game was quicker, but well, my brother reckoned at least, and I have no reason to disagree with this theory, is that like, well, first of all, I'll add that dummy halves are already quick. It's why they play it dummy half most of the time. Like, they didn't really need the game to speed up for them to suddenly realize that they had that ability. Like, someone like Damien Cook could run regardless. Like, what it's actually sort of led to is these overskilled, undersized, like, lock forwards, and Jazz Tavanga was his example of how well Jazz Tavanga has played, and one of the reason that's relevant to the Dragons conversation is because Ben Hunt moving to dummy half allowed / forced but or / unlocked Cam McInnes to go play lock, and there was certainly a time, probably not even that long ago, probably only 10 years ago, where someone like Cam McInnes just couldn't have played in that position regularly as a regular starter, but he's actually been very good there, very good defensively, so maybe he would have been able to handle it regardless. But Jazz Tavanga is a good example of someone who's done exactly that. And I've watched, like, he's played so well the last couple of weeks, and what I've seen of him, like, the first thing you see him, and I'm like, dude's looking chunkier than he used to. Like, he's put on some weight. And then I thought, well, this is a dude as well who sort of came into the NRL kind of stuck between positions, like, not quite that, a bit of like what I was saying about Corey Norman, like a little bit like good. He's good enough to play some minutes at number 9. He's good enough to play some minutes at lock, but he wasn't great enough to do both. I think he's added a bit of weight to his frame, allowed him to play more regularly as a lock forward, but he's also kept the skill set that he had from being that kind of in-betweener type player, and he's been bloody excellent. So that is my aside. You're welcome to pick that up where I left off, or we can hear the tirade. Either way, I await with what's that word for bloody? I was going to say exaltation. That's the wrong word. We'll just settle with excitement. There's a word I can't think of.
Well, it actually doubles off what your brother was talking about, because I thought you were going to throw up the idea of centres being far more threatening in 2020. But we'll get to that. I think along with the rise of the centre in 2020, you're seeing the smaller forwards have a bit of more of an impact. And we're coming off the era where it was all about size and power through the middle because, the last decade was all about Jason Taumalolo, it was all about Marty Tapau, it was all about those type of players. And there were some smaller middle forwards, but specifically in the lock position, because you've got Jazz Tavanga playing lock, you've got Cameron McInnes playing lock, you've got Jason Taumalolo playing lock, you've got Jake Trbojevic playing lock, you've got Cameron Murray playing lock. Like, there's so many different styles of lock forward. I just refer to them as middle, but we'll keep the lock here. Like, Melbourne Storm, now Wildcard, I've got a good track record of highlighting players with Moeaki Fotuaika earlier in the year. Melbourne Storm have been playing Tino Fa'asuamaleaui at lock for a long time now this season. And he is an absolute monster. He is a prototypical 2020 middle forward. And what the Melbourne Storm have done in recent weeks, and specifically on the weekend that I saw, they had a starting middle forward trio of Jesse Bromwich, Asafa Solomona, and Tino Fa'asuamaleaui. Now, if you know about Tino, that trio is bonkers. And that's what the Melbourne Storm does. That's what they do every season. They find a different wrinkle. So everyone watching, watch out for Tino Fa'asuamaleaui. He is very, very good. And he is joining Moeaki Fotuaika at the Titans next year along with David Fifita. So that's pretty cool. I'm interested to see what happens with the lock forward position and what direction it goes, because there is value. Like, as long as your defense is adequate, it doesn't matter what size you are. Because someone like Jazz Tavanga he bounces around. He gets in between defenders. He offloads. He passes. Cameron McInnes, unfortunately for him, he runs straight into very big forwards and he gets beat up a bit. But he's a workman in the middle. He's mobile. He's quick. And you want that extra foot speed, leg speed. Leg speed is what all the NRL coaches talk about, which is quite obvious there, leg speed. And that's what you want. Mobility. You also need to factor in that Tohu Harris has played the whole season pretty much in the middle. Up until this point, he was strictly an edge forward. When he was at the Storm, he played, in the halves, at centre, edge forward. Now Tohu Harris is a middle forward. He might start on the edge, but every game he moves to the middle. So it's very, very interesting just to see how different clubs have had little different tweaks. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence that James Fisher-Harris has gone to a neck level, because he is super mobile, great work ethic. He's big enough. He's got good hands, good footwork. And you're seeing someone like the Raiders are another interesting case, because I watched their results after Josh Hodgson got injured. And let me pull it up here, because it was kind of amazing. It was a bit amazing. The Raiders lose Josh Hodgson and everyone thinks, holy shit, the Raiders are fucked. But what happened is Saliva Havili started 6 games at hooker and the Raiders won 5 of those games. However, there's been a change at the Raiders, because for the last 3 games, Saliva Havili has come off the bench and Tom Starling has started at hooker. So I look at this and I'm like, whoa, hold up. Saliva Havili, Manurewa Marlins Jr., Tongan International. He just won 5 out of 6 games starting at hooker in the absence of Josh Hodgson. Why is he being demoted to the bench for less minutes? But I was listening to the Triple M podcast and Ricky Stewart was being interviewed and he outlined a few rugby league, like nerdy stuff that I really enjoyed. And he was saying like, it's just like they're having Saliva Havili through the middle as a middle forward who can cover hooker, it's just better. It's better to have someone quicker who is as powerful, like Saliva Havili is a nugget, but a bit of a leg speed, a bit of footwork, a bit of agility through the middle for the Raiders. That's what they need. And at the same time, Kuri Harawira Naira, who was predominantly an edge forward, he's returned to rugby league with the Raiders, and he's coming off the bench to play through the middle. So it goes back to the style and the balance of players that you have and just building your team. I find that every team's doing it slightly different. Every team's got a different little shtick to them. The Roosters got a bit more passing, a bit more ball movement with Sonny Bill in the middle now. Melbourne Storm just go fucking hard. They just blow teams away. Bromwich, Asafa Solomona, Fatmasuliawi. It's all there. So it's all very interesting. I'll go to the centre bit now because I reckon the change in rules and the change of, just the adjustment in the rules, I think you're seeing centres be far more effective this season than they have been. And I think at the expense of the idea of the little blokes shining. Everyone predicted that the smaller blokes will have a far greater impact, and that's somewhat true. However, I think it's more the centres that are having the impact. Because if everything's faster through the middle, defences have to compress to defend the middle, to get a few more numbers in a tackle to slow it down. And so I think centres out wide, they have more time and space to work with. And that's why Zach Lomax is so effective now. That's why Peta Hiku's so effective. Because there's just more space for them to put on some footwork, get between a defender, offload, and all that good stuff. So prior to this season, defences were so tight that the centre would probably get the footy just with their opposite right in their face, tackling them, getting them to the floor, done and dusted. And it was kind of more about the fullback wrapping around the centre and throwing the last pass. Darius Boyd styles, Billy Slater styles. Now, I believe the trend is that you're seeing teams just get the ball to the centre. That's kind of an attacking move. It's just get your centre one-on-one and he'll make something happen. So I think that's the low-key idea of the greatest change in 2020 is the attacking centres. And part of that wildcard flows into Morgan Harper, who, bit of history on Morgan Harper. He came up, I think he's a Narawahia junior out of the Waikato area. The Bulldogs signed him out of Waikato. I think he did make a New Zealand under-18 team. He's been in various New Zealand Rugby League rep programs and New Zealand Māori rep teams. I still refer back to, there was a New Zealand Māori under-17 team that had Hayes Perham, Morgan Harper, Stephen Masters, and Jackson Ferris, they're all centres, funnily enough. But they weren't playing centre in that team, but they've all settled into centre roles at the NRL level. And part of the whole COVID stuff, or lost in all the COVID stuff, was a mid-season move from Morgan Harper. He debuted, I think, last season. And then mid-season this season, he left the Bulldogs to join Manly Sea Eagles. And he started the last 2 games at centre for Manly. Against the Tigers a week prior, he scored 2 tries with 6 tackle busts. And then against the Bulldogs last weekend, his former club, he scored a try and had 6 tackle busts again. So great work for Morgan Harper, settling into a starting centre role with the Manly Sea Eagles. And my bit about the centres wildcard, you got Morgan Harper. He's come out of nowhere with Manly. Then you've got Stephen Masters. He has started 4 games in a row at centre for the Rabbitohs, dealing with Wayne Bennett. That's no easy... Like, you got to earn the trust from Wayne Bennett to get 4 games in a row as a youngster. Isan Masters, he missed 6 games in the middle of the season. He's come back to start at centre for the Cowboys in their last 2 games. You've got Hayes Perham starting at centre for the Warriors. Peter Hiku's in great form. Jackson Ferris and Matthew Tomoko, they made their debuts this season, but they haven't played since their debuts. So you've got this idea of centres being far more effective and prominent in 2020, and also one of the deepest positions. That's a lie, because every Aotearoa Kiwi's position is the deepest it's ever been. But at the centre position, you've got Joey Manu. Shans Nickel-Klokstad played at centre for the Kiwis last year. Eason Masters. Morgan Harper. Stephen Masters. Hayes Perham. Peter Hiku. Then you've got Jackson Ferris, Matthew Tomoko as well. Like, there's at least 6 centres who could be in a Kiwi squad. Like, it's kind of amazing the depth that has come out of nowhere at the centre position. Like, compared to the middle forwards, there has always been heaps of middle forwards for the Kiwis. And that has just progressed and developed to the point it is now. Like, last season, Shans Nickel-Klokstad kind of had to play centre, because for whatever reason, Eason Masters was unavailable and Peter Hiku wasn't in like great form. So your main centres were Joey Manu and Shans Nickel-Klokstad. Now you've just got so many out of nowhere, and it's kind of amazing. I like it.
Do you remember like a couple years ago when every State of Origin team announcement, like both teams would pick like 6 fullbacks, and then their entire backlines would be like halves combination, and then a bunch of fullbacks, and all the centers would be regular fullbacks. The wingers would just be fullbacks playing on the wing. And like, do you think maybe we're going to get that now, where it's like just every team picks like 5 centers, and I guess you're still going to have a specialist fullback because there's a couple of outrageously talented fellas in those positions, but just like, we'll pick 4 centers and tuck a couple centers on the wing, and everyone's got that center 2020 skill set.
That's a weird one, because if you look at like New South Wales Origin, James Tedesco's your fullback, so then you need to get Tom Trbojevic into your team, and they have also played Jack Whiten at centre. I think Tom Trbojevic has played centre, if not wing. But I think, so take Jack Whiten for example, it's more about just having skill at the centre position. Because like, assuming you get the same rules as the NRL right now, you just need someone who has great hands, can put in a kick if they need to, and has good footwork. And someone like Jack Whiten, he'd be really good at centre in the current rules, because you can give him early footy and he can make something happen. Or he's like a great last resort. Like if you shift on the last tackle to Jack Whiten, he's got a ginormous boot and he's just going to boot it downfield and everything's going to be all good. So I don't think you're going to see a team full of centres, because you can't play a centre at wing. That's just a waste. Like a centre, I've actually enjoyed it because now you're seeing more of a differentiation of the positions. So the reason the centre is the centre position, because you give them the footy 2-on-2 out wide and they can set up a try. Or you give them the footy in a 3-on-2 overlap and they make the right decision with their good distribution skills. So it's like your centre needs to be a playmaker out wide. So I think if you're going to have all these centres, playing a centre at wing or playing a centre at fullback is going to be a waste of their talent. If anything, you're going to see more fullbacks play centre. You're going to see more halves play centre because they have the skill set to be able to be a playmaker out wide, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm always more in that, like, I think I prefer, especially when it comes to international and rep teams, like, I kind of prefer the, like, what you're saying about that standardized position, like a more defined, we'll pick a winger in this role, a center in that role, a center in that, a center in there, winger here, etc., etc. Like, pick the best player in each position rather than, like, I think, like, all those years of Darius Boyd could hardly, like, playing out wherever the hell, and players like Josh Dugan and whatever, and all these Aussie rep teams, that kind of thing. And it reminds me of, like, what you get with, like, there's a reason you can do that at state of origin level or for Australia or whatever. And it reminds me of what you get with, like, there's a big conversation in the NBA at the moment about the Houston Rockets because they were not very good against the Lakers and, like, positionless basketball and whatever. And it's like, there's a reason why the Golden State Warriors were so good at that kind of thing, at playing small ball and whatever and being able to switch defenders. It's because Draymond Green is like a generational defensive talent, and because they had two of the greatest shooters of all time, three when Kevin Durant was there as well. Like, they had decent size and, like, shooting, like, either defensive excellence or scoring excellence in every position. So that, like, it's not because they played an undersized center that they were so good. So other teams trying to play undersized centers are missing the point. The reason is that the players were so good, them specifically, those individuals were so good. And then I suspect that tends to get slept on by... Well, this is the difference between innovators and imitators, though, what I'm talking about here, I suppose. I guess it's the same thing and when you get to rugby league rep teams, like, it's a different situation to how you'd want to build an NRL club versus how you would pick your rep team, because how you pick your rep team, you're dealing with the smartest, most, like, skillful, most like, multifaceted players in the entire game. You can make the pieces fit. Whereas when you're picking a general NRL squad, I suppose you got to be a little more not inflexible, because that would go against one of the run through themes of this podcast. But you do have to have specifics a little bit more in mind and actual roles and whatever, because you're not just in a situation where every player who touches the ball in the set is going to be someone who could do something game changing, because that level of talent doesn't exist the whole way through the entire league, or else it wouldn't, even if it did, it suddenly wouldn't anymore, because if everyone can do it, then it's not special, you know?
For sure, and just to finish, like, I might have to reconsider my clumping together, like, of middle forwards, to go back to our earlier discussion, because if the rules stay the same, and if the style of footy continues on this path, then the lock position becomes like the center position, where the lock position, there's an actual value to having someone play as a lock forward. Whereas prior to 2020, it was just about having three middle forwards. Like North Queensland Cowboys, you've got James Tamo, Matt Scott, and Jason Taumalolo. None of them are playing as a lock forward. They're all playing as middle forwards. And it doesn't matter what number they have on their jersey. Even the Melbourne Storm, with their Jesse Bromwich, Asafa Solomona, and Tino, that's three middle forwards. There's no quote-unquote lock forward there. But if you're playing with Brandon Smith in the middle of the field as a middle forward, he is a lock forward. Jazz Tavanga is a lock forward. Cameron McInnes is a lock forward. It's rude to them for me to just say, oh, there's 3 middle forwards there. Because that doesn't do them justice with what they bring to the team. So maybe if like things continue on this path, middle forwards are your forwards who are in the middle. That's like obvious and that's fine. But I would have to then differentiate. These are your props and this is your lock. And then that might change. Like you off the bench, you might lose that lock skill set and just have 3 middle forwards, or you might have Brandon Smith coming off your bench with a lock skill set and stuff like that. So it's very interesting. But I do, to sum up that idea, the thing about 2020 is that you've seen the value of a lock forward and you're seeing the value of a highly skilled center. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from footy in 2020. Now, that might not mean anything if everything reverts back to how it was prior to the pandemic stuff. But if everything continues on this path from 2020, it's going to be exciting if you're a center. It's going to be exciting if you're a lock forward doing some funky stuff. Like now there's just a greater opportunity for players with unique skill sets to have an impact on the game.
One other thing that this reminds me of is, I don't know if you read old mate Jared Kimber's most recent little Substacky thing. He not quite as good as our Substack newsletter, of course, but it's a very good one. And he talked about like the opening batters in international 2020 cricket. And he said that there's a weird kind of just a like juggling act, I suppose, that comes down to this like specialist versus most talented player kind of thing as well. Where like if you look at the Big Bash or 2020, whatever they call the county 2020 stuff, like all the best batsmen or the majority of the best batsmen are openers. And there's a very good reason for that, is because if you're like the best batsman in 2020, that's where you want to be. Like you demand that you get that opening spot because you want to be like, because basically opening is the best place to bat in 2020 because it's the only position where you're going to be given an over or two to actually get yourself in. You get to bat against the fielding restrictions at the start as well, so there's a little bit more room for you to hit some boundaries and get yourself started. And it's also the only position where you're regularly going to be given the opportunity to bat 10 plus overs. So all the top run scorers tend to be openers, or some fellas coming in at first drop if your team's losing an early wicket each time, or you're just batting amazingly, whatever. But like generally speaking, if you look at because he was looking at Aussie versus England, the current series they've been going through, and he's like, both these teams are picking like top sixes in which like 3 or 4, if not 5 of the players would normally be opening for their like the standard below it, which has gotten them to this like I think Marcus Stoinis is an example. Apparently he's been opening in the Big Bash or something, and he's had a real breakout season last year, and now he's batting like in the middle order for Australia in England, which is just a different role. You need to be able to bat at a different tempo and whatever, and come in like late in the innings in the 2020 versus opening the innings. But you also, that way, if you're going to pick the best number 6, the best number 5, the best number 4, the best number 3, you're not picking the best 6 batsmen for your international 2020 side, which got me thinking about how the Black Caps have set up, actually, because I think they're one of the few teams. He mentioned the West Indies as a team that seems to have a good like understanding of this. New Zealand, I would suggest, are another one where like you don't. We have seen Kane Williamson open the batting, but generally when he plays 2020s now, he seems to come in at 3 or so, and that Munro Guptill opening partnership seems relatively stable. No one's really saying that, Munro was struggling for a while there, so that was making it a little vulnerable. But, Ross Taylor batting at 4 or 5, Colin de Grandhomme's been batting at 4 a lot. Like, we seem to be able to actually set those specific, maybe it's because the Black Caps don't actually play a lot of domestic 2020 in New Zealand, so maybe that's part of it, is there's not, like, the big spotlight of the Big Bash to really hammer home a player's ability. But then also it means we don't have to pigeonhole a whole bunch of openers into the top 6. So that could lead into a whole nother hour worth of conversations, but we probably shouldn't. But that does remind me of that, because I think there's similar themes getting touched upon with that idea as well. It's definitely one I'm going to be keeping an eye on, because I hadn't really thought about it before, but it makes sense.
And you look at the skill set of Ross Taylor. Like
Exactly. It's not a 2020 opener's skill set.
But did you say
But it's perfect for that role. Yeah, his skill set is not a 2020 opener's skill set, but it's perfect for coming in at that sort of pivoty role at 4 or 5, where either you're rebuilding an innings or you're bashing at the end. He has the ability to do both of those things, which is why he's been so successful the last year or two at 2020s.
Yeah, he's a bit of a tweener. Bit of a 2020 cricket tweener. In-betweener.
Which is the type of player that England and Australia apparently haven't been picking for their 2020 team, so maybe that's a good thing for us because there is meant to be the first one was meant to be next month, eh? They were meant to be having a 2020 World Cup next month, but I think they're having that next year instead, and the Indian one is next. So I still like the ICC makes no sense when you got two World T20s coming in the space of 12 months of each other. I don't understand how that could work. I know one was meant to be a Champions Trophy, but then what happened to the Champions Trophy? It's just like there's weirdness, there's pandemic-related weirdness with sports organizations and timelines and whatever. And then there's just the ICC, which was weird even before the pandemic.
Yeah, I had an instance recently, Wildcard, with a couple of older folk, and I knew the conversation was a mess when older people in New Zealand started talking about Donald Trump around the dinner table. I experienced this recently with older people talking about Donald Trump and USA politics, and I think it's always a good time to wrap up the conversation when we start bitching and moaning about the ICC. So,
and FIFA as well fall in the same category.
Yeah, fuck them all.
Beautiful.
And on that note, like shout them out for giving us some spawn and shit, but whatever. We'll finish it here. We've already lost the plot. Kia kaha, stay beautiful, and let us know what you think about any of the topics, rugby league positions, all whites depth, whatever you want to bounce ideas off us. Hit us up anywhere, anytime. And we'll see what your sports chat is like. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Cha-cha!